Thank you. Well, good morning, church. It's awesome to be here and so nice to be in my hometown. I've been traveling all around the country and connecting with different churches and different denominations and all the different styles and flavors of the body of God in the country. But it's always a privilege when I get to be in my own backyard. And I know a few faces around the room. I was just chatting to somebody behind me just before who I used to be neighbours and connected with 35 years ago. So I'm 36, so that gives you kind of like, wow, okay, there's roots and connections everywhere. So as Pastor Kira was saying, my name's Jared, and I was a pastor at Thrive Church, and now, along with my wife, Roanna, and I, we're leading a really fun ministry called Fantail Studios. If you heard a crunch, that was Kiri just breaking a communion cup, and so that's, I think he just got married again. So, what we do there, if he's hanging out with the rabbis, it's just rubbing off and flowing through into the DNA of the church. It's exciting. Imagine if he was hanging out with some Greeks. We could, potlucks would be different. We could break plates and all sorts of things at the end of church. Actually, a long time ago, back when Thrive Church was called LCC, and when it was a lot in his younger days, we actually came here, and I was about 16, and we did a group church photo on the stage, back where we could fit everybody into a little wee corner, and we stood on your stage here, and then we broke it, and it collapsed. And so on behalf of that church, which I'm no longer on staff for, a sincere apology for 25 years ago breaking your stage. Good to see, though, you made it stronger and better than it was before. So, I want to share a few stories today because I love telling stories, and I love that, when Jesus ministered, he would tell a lot of stories. He would ask the audience a lot of questions as well, and he was an amazing communicator. And my whole life, I've just loved the art of stories. And growing up reading the Bible as a kid, I was like 100% in love with the Old Testament, and I kind of enjoyed the New, but I loved the Old because it was just full of stories and it had everything that you could want. It had kings, it had giants, it had people calling fire down from heaven, and it was just like this great epic realm of God's handiwork. And now that I'm kind of, been growing in my relationship with God and all of those things, I've found that for myself, the way that I connect with Jesus the best now is through stories. And I want to share some stories today because I love it says in Revelation that they overcame by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony. And I've just been thinking about that a little bit, how interesting for that statement that they overcome by the blood of the Lamb and something else. Because we go, well, the blood of the Lamb of Christ crucified and resurrected, that's the greatest power in the entire universe. Surely that would have been enough on its own. But it's actually when we share the testimony of what that has done in our life is when we actually release its power. It's when we talk about the victory of Christ crucified and resurrected, how he's healed us, redeemed us, saved us, restored us, forgiven us, all of those things. That's when that power of Christ's blood is actually released to those around us. And so we can just throw some PowerPoint up on the screen if we can. I lead a ministry now called Fantail Studios. I'm going to tell you a little bit about this and how this sort of genesis has happened, because this ministry has been going now for coming up to 2.5 years. So a little bit about me. I grew up in a great Christian family, and all I wanted to do was to make films and movies and TV shows that would showcase to the world the power and love of Jesus Christ, the reality of who he is today. And so I, finished high school, went to film school, graduated, moved to Invercargill, learnt to roll my R's. So that's why I say it's great to be in church rather than church, like a normal person or person. I married my wife, and she's a southern girl, had lived in Invercargill her whole life. And so now the accent's stuck to me like glue. So, give me a little bit of grace this morning as I speak, because those R's are pretty thick. I've even got it stronger than she does. We've got a southerner over there. Great. I was just in Gore last week. Good old Gore. Come on. And so I was down there working in television for about 5 years, directing and filming and editing and all of those things, just secular documentaries, but really learning my craft. And then God spoke to me one day very dramatically, called me to become a pastor. And so like any rational person would do, I lay down on the ground and I cried for about 45 minutes. And when I went to Bible college, moved back to Rangiora, joined Thrive Church, kids pastor, youth pastor, assistant pastor, just kind of learning and being developed by God and actually how to really love people, how to hear His voice, how to minister in the Holy Spirit. And that was great. Did that for about 10 years. But during that time of really being discipled in a lot deeper way and having fathers and mothers in the faith that would really kind of chip off a few of the rough edges that I had. Still have definitely got a few more to go. But in that process, I was really crying out in my heart a lot of that time going, God, I love that you've called me to minister because it's such a great privilege and responsibility, but I don't understand because you made me to create films and television about you. I began to seek Him and pray, and about 8 years into pastoring, I was going, God, if you would just give me a sabbatical, like give me 2 or 3 months off, and I can make one documentary about you. Just let me make one TV show. And as I was praying about this more and more and more, I got taken to Israel, which was an amazing experience. And God began to speak to me about this a lot more. And then I came home to New Zealand, and it was my second night in New Zealand, and I had one of the most supernatural dreams that I'd ever had in my life. And I found myself in this dream that was so vivid. It was like sharper than 4K TV could ever be. And I was standing on this bridge over this winding river, and I looked down this pathway, and I saw a man walking towards me, and he was wearing a 3-piece suit, and he was holding a briefcase. And he looked like the most expensive lawyer that money could buy. So naturally, I became very nervous. And then as he got closer, in dreams, sometimes you just know things. So in this dream, I just knew that this was God the Father walking to meet me. My heart started racing in my chest. It was pounding away. And then He met me on the bridge, and He said, Jared, I don't want you to make a TV show about me. I want you to make hundreds of them. So you need to build a team, launch your own channel, and get started. I woke up kind of like they do in the movies, and I'd always thought, whenever I see this in a film, I've always gone, that's so cheesy. I'm never going to make a film like that has this moment, because it never happens. I sat bolt upright in bed, and I went, like someone had thrown a bucket of water on me, and my heart was racing, I was hyperventilating, and I looked and it was 11 p.m., and I knew that I was going to be awake for the rest of the night because I just had an encounter with God. And in that moment, as I lay in bed awake all night, the feeling that I had, the realization, I felt like I had just won an internship to the greatest company on the planet. And that millions and millions of people had applied to be an intern with this, phenomenal leader. And I'd never put an application in, and God had put one in for me and had chosen me. And I lay in bed with this incredible sense that the Creator of the universe, who had put these dreams and desires in my heart, saw me. And I was like, wow, God sees me. He sees me. And He's heard me, and He's calling me, and He's releasing me. And so this means like tomorrow, everything changes, and it's going to fall into place, and it's just going to go off. Reality was, God was like, yes, I see you, and now we're going to do 18 more months of discipleship and get a few more of those edges off. Until the day rolled around when one day God spoke to me again and said, hey, you're finished pastoring, it's time to hand in your notice, and we're going to launch a ministry. And we had just had our first lockdown due to COVID, and I went, wow, okay, we're going to launch a ministry funded by faith, and we're going into a global recession. God, you've picked some really bad timing. And he was like, wow, we had a very brief conversation about who was in charge and who wasn't. And if we're going to do things by faith, Jared, then we actually have to have faith. If we make it really practical and easy, that's just called humanism. And that's just you doing your thing. And so we launched, resigned the job, and we began to borrow cameras off people. We didn't own anything or anything like that. We had enough finances that we set up the charity. We had enough finances for me to go full-time for about 2 months. And I remember saying to my wife, going, if God is in this, He'll breathe on it and it will go. And if He's not, it'll crash and burn. But better to crash and burn really, really quickly than to drag that out for a year or two. So if we're going to fail, let's just fail with style. And so that was 2.5 years ago, and God has just been doing some amazing things. I want to introduce you to our team. Let's just throw up again the next slide. God's been calling people to come around this ministry, people that have been trained in film and television or have a passion for it, have gone, man, I want to take the gospel to people where they are. Whether they're on their bus on YouTube going to school, or whether they're on the other side of the world flicking through the TV channels, I want to take the radical power of Jesus Christ to them. And so for most of the people that are on our team, we've just sort of had the same conversation, which is, hey, I've got a great idea. Why don't you pray about this, then quit your job, and believe Jesus for finances, and the only thing I can guarantee is adventure. Your relationship with God will have to grow. And God has been pulling together what I like to call media missionaries, people that have got that same heart to take the power of Jesus Christ, to capture it in a moment, and then showcase it to the world. So what I want to do is I'm going to share a few stories this morning with the time that I've got remaining, because I want to encourage you and inspire you and just release some truth this morning that Jesus Christ globally is doing some incredible things. But here in New Zealand, His handiwork and His fingerprints are everywhere. And I don't know if you've ever, gone to buy a car off Trade Me or something like that, and you research which type of make and model you want to have, and you do your research and you decide, this is the type of car I'm going to get. And you haven't seen many of them around. But once you've decided this is what you want to get and you become aware of it, you start seeing those cars at traffic lights everywhere. Everywhere you look, there is that make and model. And I have found that as I have decided at different times with the Holy Spirit, I remember one day He said to me, Jared, I want you to make a television series on people that I've set free supernaturally from addiction, where I've turned up in a moment, I've healed them and restored them by the power of my blood, and I've set their life on a new trajectory. And I went, man, God, I don't know if I can think of anybody that has been supernaturally set free from a lifestyle of addiction. And then everywhere I went, they were everywhere. And I wasn't even bringing it up. People would just talk to me about it. I was like, oh my gosh, this is everywhere. Everywhere I turn, God is doing something amazing. And we're in a position now as a ministry where we can't even capture, record, and film all the stories that we find out about. There is just so many things that we're seeing God doing just in New Zealand that we can't even capture them all, because He is just moving everywhere, which is part of our new challenge. We're releasing a supernatural film school to help make disciples of people who are called to the creative arts, so we can create and release more people that will capture God's stories in different languages and cultures around the world, because we've got a dream of seeing the gospel reach 1 billion people across every language group around the world. And to do that, we've got to raise up disciples who will go out, film these stories, and showcase them to the world. So I want to show you one story now. Not because it's a great example of our production quality, because this is actually the most no-frills, semi-budget filming we've ever done. This was one of the very first things we ever made. And this was made all at that time with borrowed equipment. Since then, God has blessed us with much better gear and all of those things. But I want to show you this story because I want to encourage us this morning that the power of the gospel doesn't need to be dressed up. It needs to be shared. The authenticity of who Jesus Christ is isn't how cleverly we articulate it or communicate it. But the world is always listening for a sound that is genuine and authentic. And when their hearts hear the authentic representation of who Jesus is and the love that He has for them, there is something God designed in them that just awakens up and goes, man, I want to know more. So I want to show you one of the most basic stories we've ever produced, because the power of the gospel doesn't need to be dressed up. It just needs to be shared. So maybe we'll dim a few lights and we'll watch this story, and I can tell you a few things about how one testimony has put a ripple of God's love across the country. Awesome. Thank you.
It was radical. People talk about radical encounters. I thought I was having a heart attack. It made me feel my heart for the first time in my life. I was 49 years old. My father was a violent man. My mother was a Christian. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Once Were Warriors. Well, that looked like a pretty good family to me. So my life was foster homes, boys' homes, youth prison, rehabs for heroin and alcohol. It was an ongoing cycle, just going round and round. I was on a treadmill that I never thought I'd get off. I have mental health issues, so I was ADHD, have OCD, Asperger's, dyslexia, and there's one other, but I need my wife here to tell me that one because I always forget one. I moved to Kaikoura after the Christchurch earthquake 6 years later, and all I wanted to do was go there, go fishing and hunting, and be left alone. And I was trying to walk away from the gang I was with, which had been my whole life. A long story short, I had a hate for police, a full hate for police, and I got invited to this church by a guy that I knew in Kaikoura. And because I couldn't come up with a lie, as part of my Asperger's condition, as I'm brutally honest and I have no filter, and I just said to him, yes, I'll come. And I hated it. I couldn't stand the music. That's one thing that stood out to me was the Christian music. It was really horrible, eh? Everybody was really happy, and that wasn't what I was used to. There was no drugs and there was no alcohol. But they seemed really happy, and I'd seen that. It was just a different world. I couldn't get out of there quick enough. I left on the last song. Following week, I seen that same pastor again, and he invited me back. And I still couldn't come up with a lie, but I just happened to say, yeah, okay, I'll see you there. But on the Saturday, I got pulled over by the police. I was arrested for my history and what had been going on in my life. I later found out that they had a poster the size of my chest up of me in their police station in Kaikoura as a person of interest. They have a lot of assault charges on police and a lot of assault charges. But this cop came along to me, and he treated me like how we should treat people. He was respectful, he was fair, showed his heart too, actually, when I look back at it now. I went home after they released me, and I started festering with real anger again. It wasn't about that cop, it was the fact of just the authority of coming against me. And I had a lot of issues over the years with the police. Not all of it my fault, but definitely not all of it their fault either. But I said to my wife that night, I will never let go of that hate that I have for them. We walk into the church, and I'm sitting at the back of the church and waiting for the music was just started, and that cop that pulled me over walked in. And he walked in with his 4 kids and his wife. And he seen me standing at the back of the church, and I seen him. And I grabbed my wife, we're standing up, I grabbed her by the hand and I says, that's that cop that got me yesterday. And I felt something that right there and then. And she said, don't go over and fight in the church. I've fought everywhere. I stabbed somebody in front of a prison guard because I just had to get him because I didn't have any rules. I felt something. When he walked in, he just sat down and had his head down. And I grabbed my wife's hand and I said, something's wrong. But I don't know if I'm having a stroke or maybe a heart attack, but something's wrong with my chest. I've got pain in my chest. I kept looking at that cop and I said to my wife, I just need to go over and talk to him. When the church finished, I walked straight over, tapped him on the shoulders and said to him, hey bro, I'm sorry. He turned around, he was crying. He goes, I'm sorry that I came and did that to you. I'm really sorry. And he said to me, do you mind if we pray for you? I says, yeah. I don't know what pray for me was. He goes, come up to the front and I'll get some guys to pray with you. He went and got 3 other guys. They were all cops. All of them were cops. And they all put their hands on me and started praying for me. And I felt something that I knew what was happening was God gave me the first time I'd ever felt empathy for somebody. That was the very first time. I'd never felt that before. I'd only ever had hate, rage and anger in me. Even when my mother died and my daughters died, I only got angrier. I never felt loss or sadness or anything. It was just hate, rage and anger. And this day I felt empathy because I felt for him. And I realised that where I was standing underneath that roof, him and I were brothers because I was in God's house. Changed my whole life just like that. And I know now it was God softening my heart. That day my whole life changed. Like I was finally free. I finally come home. I finally belong somewhere. I didn't just belong in gangs in prison or rehabs or on the streets doing my rubbish. I finally belonged somewhere where there was actually love. My hate for the police went that day. Completely gone. I never thought it would happen. I'd only said that to my wife the day before, and a lot of people think I lost my marbles that day because it just changed so much, bro? Going from, a man of crime to a man for Christ, and I just look at it now and it's just off the rails. Yeah.
Man, how amazing is Jesus? Oh my goodness. Our God is so good. Now, how can you have a story where someone says, I'm going to be at war with the police for the rest of my life, and then a Christian policeman arrests them, and then within 24 hours, that man is surrounded by police giving his life to Christ? And there are no rules in God's playbook other than radical love. Where he goes, I will do anything to bring my lost and broken children home. Every time I hear people's testimonies, and I've heard so many, I'm so often amazed. That's a 6-minute story, and varying different styles. I think over the last 2 years we've made about 100 different short testimonies. We've made longer half-hour shows and mini-series as well, and we're now reaching on television, I think it's about 20 different countries around the world now that we're sharing stories with. And it's something new that's very exciting. We've just started partnering with Derek Prince Ministries as well. And we've been doing some filming with them, and they're starting to translate and dub some of our content with them into Arabic and have it playing in the Middle East, which is a really exciting thing to be starting to work in. But I wanted to show this story because I want to tell you a little bit what happens when we begin to share our testimonies. Because this is not your testimony, you have your own one. But what makes a testimony powerful is when it's shared. And so we shared Lucky's story, and we just started the ministry, and I don't even know if we were on TV back then, and we just created our Facebook page, and I said, Lucky, nobody knows who I am. I'm just a man in the background. So when we release your video on Facebook, and honestly, I have no idea how many people might watch this, but could I put your cell phone number with the video? Because if people watch this and they're struggling and they've been in prison and all these different things, it's not my story. It's your story. So could they contact you if they want someone to pray with them? And he said, yeah, that'll be fine. Oh, how many people are going to watch? So we started on Facebook with this cell phone number. I called it the Ugly Beginnings because we didn't have our streaming platforms and all of those things then. Within a week, he'd had over 100 phone calls and messages from people around the country wanting to connect and have him pray with them as they were seeing this. And then the video began to go viral and started playing in different gang headquarters around the country. As these different gang leaders were watching, seeing how God had changed the life of somebody who was inherently broken in the same way that they were broken. And Lucky was already beginning to work with some of the gangs, but this kind of just accelerated everything as people began to say, man, if Jesus could help you, do you think he could help me too? And then the police began to see the story, and Lucky got invited, once this video had played, to the New Zealand Police Commissioner. Lucky got invited to be a guest speaker at the police academy at a conference that was filled with Christian police from all over the country. And Lucky got brought in as a guest speaker to stand in front of the police and share his story, how God had worked through them to set him free, what 30, 40 years of institutionalization can never do. Through them, Jesus did in a moment. And so I began to wonder, God, you're doing something pretty amazing here. And he said, yeah, I am, Jared. You should film this. I went, okay, and I'm going to skip over a few stories now because of time, and I could just tell stories all day long, and we can catch up in the foyer afterwards and do all of these things, because I don't have to be anywhere until Auckland tomorrow morning. So we're all good. And Shine TV, by the way, if you want to watch some of our things on television, Shine are amazing. So they play everything that we make, and they are so generous. This week coming, they've donated to Fantail Studios, their entire studio, their equipment, and all of their crew for a week. So I can make whatever type of studio shows I'd like to do. And so Monday and Tuesday, I'm bringing in some of New Zealand's main gang leaders into the Shine studio to capture more of their stories, what God has been doing. But after this story went out, let's just jump to the next slide, team. For the last 2 years now, we have been filming a feature-length documentary on what God has been doing behind the scenes in the Black Power and the mongrel mob. And it's a film called Mana Atua, which, you know, if we were to put it in English, it doesn't really do it justice in English, but it means the greatness of God. And now let's just jump through another slide. This guy's got an amazing story. I could tell you this one over tea or coffee. Let's jump to the next one. I want to tell you this story, and then I'll wrap up with a few things. This guy's called Jesse Church. And we've got so many amazing stories that we've been filming over the last 2 years, and the film's due to come out around September, all going well next year. But Jesse Church hated Christians. And I interviewed him in the Iron Dog, which is the mongrel mob kingdom headquarters in Hamilton. Jesse's one of about 300 patched mongrel mob members. But Jesse told me his story. He said, I hated Christians. And he said, I'm a cage fighter. And any time I had a fight coming up with someone that I knew was a Christian, I'd make extra effort to totally destroy them. And he said, I was really getting into all of my different spiritualities. And so before each fight, I had a spiritual guide that would help me pray to the different gods of war. He said, one day I had a fight coming up with a fighter whose cage name was the Preacher. And I thought, another Christian, I'll destroy him. He said, I got into the ring. And I see this man, the Preacher, and I see him praying to Jesus. And like my blood was boiling. And so I began praying to my different gods of war that they would give me strength to win and to totally annihilate him. And the fight started, and like any other fight, I began to destroy him. But then the momentum shifted. I ended up on the back foot, and for the first time in my career, I got knocked out. First time I've ever lost a fight by being knocked unconscious, KO'd. But he says, when I was knocked out, he says, it's not like it was a little thing down to the count of 10. He said, it took a quarter of an hour for me to fully regain my total consciousness. And when I came to, after being knocked out by the Preacher, I knew one thing. God was real, and I'd had a meeting with him when I was unconscious. But I had no memory of what had happened. Just he was real, and I'd met him. See, a year went past, and through a series of circumstances, I ended up giving my life to Jesus. I then found myself in church, and I took communion. See, the moment that I took communion, my memory was instantly restored of that day. And he said, I saw myself standing in the ring outside of my body, looking at my unconscious body on the ring floor. He said, and then Jesus came. And he looked at me and he stood over my body. And he said he had massive holes in his hands. And he said, and then blood poured out of his hands and he covered my body in his blood. He goes, since then I've been spontaneously filled with the Holy Spirit and I've been set free from a spirit of suicide and depression. He goes, I'm a Christian now. And I'm sitting there in the mongrel mob headquarters with a patch gang member telling me about how Jesus loved him so much, he knocked him unconscious so he could talk with him. That's the enough is enough moment right there. And so I leaned in and I asked him, and said, well, Jesse, can you help me understand, if you're a Christian now, why are you still a patched gang member? God has done all this for you. That is a radical demonstration of his love. why are you still a Patch gang member? And he said to me, well, the only way I can put it to you is like this. When I was in my darkest, this gang took me in. Now that I've found the light, should I abandon them? If I cannot be Jesus to my brothers, who can be? And I've been sitting in different meetings with him and a whole lot of these other gang leaders for 2 years now, capturing the moment of people becoming aware of who Jesus is. And then over 2 years, following their lives as Jesus begins to work with them behind the scenes to the point where they are encountering his love, changing their lifestyles, impacting the people around them, getting set free from addiction and depression and suicide. And we've been working on this feature film to showcase to New Zealand and the world how the love of Christ can come in to the most broken people, that no one is that broken or that lost that they can't be found, healed, and restored. One of our last meetings we actually had Black Power member and a mongrel mob member together, traditional arch rivals, sharing their faith with Patch gang members, talking about how Jesus had changed their life. I want to encourage you this morning that Jesus Christ is at work in every sphere of our society. At the moment we've got this film going on, we're doing a television series, Demystifying the Supernatural, a teaching series on deliverance. We've got a series that we're doing with what God's doing in the realm of sex trafficking. We've got a fun adventure series that we've been producing in Africa and a whole lot of other shows, because I've got to tell you that everywhere we look, Jesus is doing something. And if you go away today with just one thing, it would be this from my heart. Would you remember what Christ has done in your own life? Would you take some time aside to sit down and begin to write it out, your testimony fresh? So that when you're talking with somebody and they say, what did you do on the weekend? You say, I went to church. And they go, really? You go, yeah, I'm a Christian. Because once upon a time, God did this in my life and it changed my life. And so I wanted to share this morning because I'm really excited with what I'm seeing God doing, and I'm really excited to share it with the world. If we just jump to the next one, people often want to know how can they hear more about the ministry and what we're doing. Some simple things you can do today is you can subscribe to us on YouTube, Fantail Studios. Everything we make, we put out is free. We also have a streaming platform. It kind of looks like Netflix. It's called fantailstudios.com, but it's free, and you don't have to put any details in to access any of the shows. You can see us on Shine TV as well. And after church, if you want to be a part of, the special features that we release and the special notices and prior screenings and all of those things, come see my beautiful wife, Roanna, or myself. We can get your email and add you to our email list. And then very lastly, if we just jump to the last slide, if Holy Spirit would lead you to, if you'd like to take some time and consider it, I'd like to invite you to be ministry partners with us. We've worked really hard applying for different grants and things like that, but it's very, very hard to secure grant money for something that is so unashamedly Christ-centric and celebrates the power of the gospel. And we still work on all those things, but this is very much a ministry that's funded by faith. And going into next year, our vision budget that we need to be able to launch our film school, launch the rest of our supernatural documentary series, and finish this film so we could showcase the power of what God is doing around the world. We're still believing to raise another $300,000. And we have a whole lot of other equipment and things like that we're believing for so that God can keep growing this ministry. And we're also planning another ministry campus in the States. But I just wanted to invite you. Would you consider just asking Holy Spirit, Lord, do you want me to partner with this ministry? If yes, awesome. If no, awesome. I'm not too phased because it's God's vision, so it's His bill. Which is really great when you've got to raise $300,000 because television is not a cheap exercise. But we're reaching millions of people with the gospel. And if we could do a crusade for $300,000, it'd be the most economical crusade the world has ever seen. And I love the power of media when you combine it with the power of His anointing. Because once it's made, it lasts until Jesus comes back again. And it keeps touching more and more people. Even some of the short clips that we've made around the gang film that we've just released moments on social media, within a few weeks have reached 300,000 people. It's incredible what he's doing. So you've got these on your seats, and I won't go on about this much longer, but you can scan this or fill it in. I don't actually know how to do internet banking. My wife does. So I'm very old school. I actually still pen and paper. But if you like my wife, you can scan the QR code and you can set it up, and we're a registered charity, so you get your donations receipt and all of those things. So you might like to give a one-off donation. You might like to partner with us regularly. That's totally up to you and Jesus. If you want to know more about the ministry and how you can stay connected with us, come see one of us after the service. Give us your emails, and that would be awesome. But the key thing, the very key thing, take time between now and Christmas. Reflect on what Christ has done for you. So within 30 seconds to a minute, you could articulate a snapshot of one moment when the reality of Christ was manifest in your life. That by the power of the blood of the Lamb, the word of the testimony, you could see Christ overcome in your community. You could see what he has done in you be replicated in the lives of other people. It's been so awesome to share my heart with you this morning. I hope you've been blessed. I hope you've been encouraged. If you want more stories, come talk to me afterwards, because I've got them till the cows come home. I don't know where they go, but eventually they come home. So awesome. Thank you very much. God bless. Thank you for having me.